So starting today, the new parak we're learning as a schus refuah shlema for Ilan Chaya Baserach. We're starting parak Beis Shammai, daf lamed vav amid beis. Beis Shammai Omer. So now, what we're going to be talking about, we've talked a lot about the pigel. We'll continue with pigel. We've been talking about the matnas dam, that you have to have a machshavas pigel during the matanas dam, during shchita, kabbalah, eloch, and zrika. Now we're going to say within the matana, I think we've come across once or twice the concept of a faglim b'chatzi matir, whether you could have a machshavas pigel on part of a matir. For example, one of the matir, mishchita, zrika is another matir. So we're going to be talking about the matir of what is the dam of zrika, and how much of the zrika has to be done with a machshavas pigel. So Beis Shammai Omer, kol hamnitnin al mizbeach hachitzin. Whenever there's a din of, whenever you have a matana on the mizbeach hachitzin, as we've seen a number of times, right? We've come across the matnas, the couple of matanas. For example, the most familiar example is the matanas of Yom Kippur that go not just lifnim but lifnai v'lifnim. But you also have that. There's also matnas dam that go on the mizbeach hapnimi. So, but now we're talking about those matanas that they go on the mizbeach hachitzin, the typical carbon where the chatas goes on the top of the mizbeach, the kronis, the oilus ha'oif goes on top of the chut hatzikra in the upper part of the mizbeach, and the other karbanos, the oila and the shlomim, and what did I leave out? The asham, those all go on the bottom. The dam. When you do the zrika, again, I hesitate to use the word zrika because in the case of the chatas, it's not zrika. It gets smeared with his hands directly on the mizbeach, as we're going to see in the Gemara today. But there's so like we said, it goes on the mizbeach hachitzah. The standard kabbanas go on the mizbeach hachitzah. So all those things that you have a matnas dam, either a zrika or a placing, an esinas hadam on the mizbeach hachitzim, the matana achas keeper. As soon as you do one of the matanas, you mechaper the carbon chatas, as again something we've seen before. Again, and I'll just mention this now. Maybe every once in a while, maybe every beginning of every parak, try to take a look at that introduction at the beginning of the art scroll, at the beginning of the first volume of the art scroll, and it will probably make more sense as we go along. But we've seen that the chatas has 4 separate applications of dam, the sinus dam, on the 4 kronos. The other karbanis, you do 2 matanas, shtayim shehim arba, which is on 2 opposite corners. But any matana, whatever the case, whether it's 2 or 4, matana achas kiper, just a single matana, you already have a kapara. The others are not ma'akiv. That means once you did the single matana, you already got a kapara. Well, b'chatas shtei matanas. And the Beis Shammai says by the chatas it's different. By the chatas you have to have 2 matanas. Beis Hillel says no, it's going to have to be the same then by the chatas and by other karbanos, all of them, a single matana is mechaper. Lefikach. What's going to be the outcome of this rule? That a single matana is enough to be mechaper, the others are not, strictly speaking, necessary, like for the kapara. If he made the first matana properly with all the proper machshavas, and he made the second one with the machshavas pigel, keep it. He gets a kapara. It's too late to passel the carbon since the second nesina is already after the person got the kapara. You already finished all the matirin. You finished avodas hadam. This is just an extra nesina, and it's not. You can't be mafagel with that machshava. But conversely, if he has a machshava on the first one chutz l'zmana, that's a shniya chutz l'mkayma, and the second one is a machshava chutz l'mkayma, then pigel b'chayven olav karas. The second machshava of chutz l'mkayma, even though we said if you have a machshava during the shchita or kavalu haylacha, and they have a machshavas chutz l'koimei in the zrika, that will not be a machshavas. That can't be pigel, because as long as you have another one of the matirim machshavas chutz l'koimei, that ruins the pigel. So, but in this case, since we're saying that the first matana is really the crucial one, and any ones after that are not entirely necessary, so therefore, it's not going to, the machshavas chutz l'koimei is already like as if you had a machshava chutz l'koimei while you were bringing the emurim or while you were eating the basar. It's after the avodas hadam was completed. However, this is all by nitnin al mizbeach hachitzin. Kol nitnin al mizbeach hapnimi, there's a different rule. Shem chisar achas manamatanis ki loy keeper. On the mizbeach hapnimi, you have to have all the matanis, which is generally 4 matnas dam. We do it by certain, I think the Par Helm Davar Shal Tziba and the Parakai Mashiach and the Serum of the Nasi, those all, you have to have all 4 matnas in order to be mechaper. They're all needed. So then, lefikach nasan kulan ketiknan va'acha shaloi ketiknan psula va'ein bakaras. It doesn't make a difference the order, as long as one is shaloi ketiknan, meaning it's chutzlum kaimei l'chayr. We're not going in Rabbi Yehuda that it could be a machshava sinuach, but if he has a machshava shaloi ketikna, that's going to passel the whole carbon, and it's not going to have a din pegel. It's going to be stam apostle. So we're not really going to engage so much with the Mishnah, at least not up front. Well, now we're just going to turn around. Where do we get this? What the first din of the Mishnah was, that b'mizbech hachitzon, a single matnas dam is mechaper and the other ones are extraneous. Where does that come from? We learn out from the pasuk. It says, "Vasisa lesecha habasa v'adam amizbechacha amizbeach Hashem lekecha v'dam zvachecha yishbech amizbech mizbech Hashem lekecha v'abasa teicha." The Torah says v'dam zvachecha yishbech. That means all zvachim, and with one shvicha, as soon as you put the dam on the mizbeach, you have a kapara. The other ones are not necessary. Just one. As soon as you're shayvech the dam, as soon as the dam goes on it, it's pot. Now the Gemara is going to ask a series of questions, and I'm just going to set this up for you to make it easier. I'm going to ask a series of questions from we see other brises that use this same pasuk for other purposes, and the terutzim are going to be that only one man da'amar uses the pasuk for this other purpose. There's a second man da'amar who uses it for a different, that learns out whatever was learned from the brisa from a different source, and therefore dam zvachecha yishbech is still available to teach us that nidin matana achas keeper. The fact we need dam zvachecha yishbech for a different purpose. Where do we know that all the different karbanos all need that you should pour the dam after you, as we know, right? You do a shchita and a kabbalah sadam, and you bring it to the mizbeach, and then you do the zrika, the nesinas sadam on the mizbeach. But then you still have dam left in the kli, and as we've seen, that has to go opposite the side of the mizbeach. It gets poured onto the bottom of the mizbeach. How do we know that applies to other karbanos? That means the Torah says this legabi chatas, that you have to pour it connected to side. But how do we know for an oila and a asham and a shlamim, how do we know that same din applies? That the rest of the dam goes on the yisai. Tamad loyma v'dam zvachecha yishvach. The Torah says, so we say, the Brisa says, we learn it out from this pasuk of dam zvachecha yishvach. That tells you that all of the karbanos get poured on the yisai. So how could you say it's telling you shanosim matana achas keeper if it's also telling you this din of matan dam liyasayid for all karbanos? So Gemara, no, this din of matan dam liyasayid, that's only this brisa that says you learn it out from the pasuk of dam zvachecha yishbech. But Rebbe learns it out from a different pasuk. Naftalei midu Rebbe, Tanya Rebbe Aimer, va'anisher bedam yimotza. Whatever's left with the dam should be poured on the let's see the whole pasuk. You should pour the dam of the chatas on the walls of the mizbeach. This is the pasuk that tells you. This is where we see the din of shvichas dam on the yesod. What does it have to say anisha bedam yimatze? It's just it was talking anyway about dam. It should just say anisha yimatze. Why does it say the word bedam? We only know by a chatas, which has a matan dam, which has a matan dala, that you do 4 nesinas hadam. So maybe that's where that's the only case where you have a din of pouring out what's left on the yisayid. Shar dom mina. And how do we know for the other karbanos? Tamalayim of anisha bedam yimotze. Shein tamalayim bedam, tamalayim bedam. Lila kol adam shetun matan dam the yisayid. The Shita Mekubetzis takes out this extra. It seems repetitive. He's saying over what we said at the beginning. He just takes out the extra and he says it cleans up the lashon. But it's just like we said. You learn it out from Badam. That tells you all other karbanos also need manas dam l'yasayid. So according to Rebbe, we still have dam zvachecha yishvach to tell you shenim matan achat kippah. Then now the Gemara asks another use of this pasuk of dam zvachecha yishvach in the braysa. Bakati lachi yuda also. We need the pasuk of dam zvachecha yishvach a different thing. Like we said, there are different karbanos that have different ways of applying the dam. The standard is with zrika, right? That the oila and the shlamim and the asham, you zayrik the dam with his fingers from far away. But other karbanos, for example, a carbon pesach, you do b'shvicha. You pour the blood, you go right up to the mizbeach, and you pour directly from the klisharas onto the mizbeach. So we said that everyone agrees, as we're going to see in a minute, that if you do a zrika in a place where you're supposed to do shvicha, it's not yaitza. Shvicha is more direct; it's going directly on the mizbeach. So when you do a zrika, you're not doing it as directly, so you're not yaitza. But how do you know the other way around that it is yaitza? That if something was supposed to be done with zrika and you did it more intimately, you did it with a shvicha where you poured it directly on, how do you know that that's yaitza? The pasuk says dam zvachecha yishvach, that all the karbanos, it says zvachecha, all karbanos yishvach can have a shvicha. So we see the pasuk is being used for a different purpose. Now we'll get back in a second to a little bit more about this zrika versus shvicha. But first we're going to answer the kasha. So we see that the pasuk is coming to tell you that you can do shvicha even when you're supposed to do zrika. You say, no, our man the Amar that answered that Zam Zvachecha Yishvach is telling you Shenosim Matan Achas Keeper, he doesn't use this for this din to tell you that when you're supposed to do zrika, you do shvicha, because we go like Rabbi Kiva. It's like Rabbi Kiva who says there is no such thing. If you have to do zrika, you have to do zrika. You have to do shvicha, you have to do shvicha, and you can't do shvicha b'makom zrika. The Tanakh. This is where it's going to come out. It's going to bring out what the point of zrika versus shvicha. Baruch berchas haPesach pater es shel zevach. There's a different bracha that you make when you bring a carbon Pesach versus the carbon chagiga. Zevach over here is referring to the carbon chagiga. There's the 2 karbanos that you bring before Pesach. You bring a chagiga along with the Pesach there's a chiv to do a chagiga as well. But the brachas are different. One you say to bring a Pesach, and the other one you say to bring a zevach or a chagiga. So the Tana Kama says if you make the bracha for the Pesach, which requires shvicha, you're also going to pater the zevach. You're also going to pater the chagiga, since the chagiga has the same, could be yaitza with the sinas dam of the Pesach. So the bracha that you make on the Pesach could also be mitzi on the chagiga. But shel zevach le pater es Pesach, but not vice versa, because according to everyone, you can't be yaitza in something that requires shvicha like a Pesach with zrika. And since you're making a bracha for the zrika, for the chagiga, which requires zrika, its bracha cannot be mitzi the Korban Pesach, which requires shlicha. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. That's Rabbi Yishmael's sita. We have to keep in mind this Rabbi Yishmael, who's the chalik on Rabbi Akiva, because that's going to be relevant in a minute. Rabbi Akiva says, like we said before, you can never be mitzi yaitza your shvicha with zrika, and you also can't be yaitza your zrika with shvicha. Neither one works. So this is where we see that there's a machlekes that Rabbi Akiva disagrees with this limud of dam zvachecha yishvach to tell you that shvicha will apply even when you're supposed to do zrika. He holds it doesn't apply, and therefore your bracha even on a Pesach will not be Yotze your Chagiga, since it requires different zrikas, and therefore Rabbi Akiva could be the mandam of our brayso. Now Gemara asks us, I think this is the third one. We still have another use for this pasuk. This pasuk dam zvachecha yishvach is like the jackknife of psukim. There's all kinds of uses. Akati lahachi yudasa mibayale l'chadetanya. Rabbi Yishmael Yishmael says, this is the pasuk. Ach b'char sar, b'char kesef, b'char eis, loisifta. This is talking about a b'char, the din of a b'char. Like we know, a b'char, when an animal of any of these kinds of animals is the firstborn, the din is that you give it to a kohen. The kohen brings it as a carbon. We'll learn a little bit more about this on Amud Beis. And the pasuk says, loisifta. These are not capable of being padui. As we're going to see in Amud Beis, rather the din by them is that when they get a mum, you can eat them as is without being brought as a carbon. But there's no such thing as padiyah when other karbanis, when they get a mum, what you do is you're paid to them, you pay for them, and then you use the money to buy a replacement carbon. But that doesn't apply in the case of b'char. There's no replacement for a b'char, right? Because it's not you can't make something else into a b'char. So the din is you just eat it when it gets a mum. Kodesh es domam tizrik al hamizbeach. The pasuk continues, and it says about the b'char that the kodesh, and then you take as domam and you throw it on the mizbeach, which is essentially the avodah of a shlamim. Ve'es chelvam taktir, and you bring the emurim on the mizbeach. Isha l'reach nichayach l'Hashem. So zok the Gemara. What do we learn from this pasuk? That tells you, the pasuk tells you straight out that it needs the zrikas, the matan dam on the mizbeach, and you bring the emurim on the mizbeach. Ma'aser pesach minayin. How do we know that the same applies to ma'aser pesach? The Torah never tells you explicitly, directly, by a korban pesach and by ma'aser, when you take one out of every 10 animals and give it to ma'aser, that where do we know that those also have the din that you have to do nesinas dam and emurim? So we learn from dam zvachecha that just like by bechar it says nesinas dam and it says emurim. Actually, this dam zvachecha is only going on the dam part. The emurim we learn from a different pasuk, but since it's not relevant here, the Gemara doesn't bring it. But dam zvachecha tells you all the karbanis, meiser and pesach, which are similar to bechar. I think the Gemara in other place explains why it's limited to these. But Dam Zvachecha Yishva tells you that Meiser and Bechar, Meiser and Pesach will be like Bechar, that it's going to need a Nesinas Dam on the Mizbech.
So this is how you know that by a Pesach it's only a Shvicha, not a Zrika? I'm using Zrika as...
Usually that happens to be the case, but that's not the point over here. The point is just that that it needs an...
It's fascinating. We're talking about the whole time of Korban Pesach that there's Shvicha, not Zrika. And now we're asking the question, how do you even know that there's a...
They didn't see this dam at all.
Right.
Yeah. So, I'm saying before we were talking about how does it affect the fact that you have a korban Pesach that has a shvicha. We weren't talking before, the earlier Gemara or Brisa was not talking about the source for that a Pesach is b'shvicha. It happens to be, this would be a source for it.
But the pasuk itself doesn't say shvicha, it says tizrik, which I would say would be actual, the Nesinas Dam should be zrika. So
right,
we're taking the pasuk, comparing Pesach and Meiser, and then having a different Nesinas Dam.
So you're saying, how could you import? But because it uses the dam zvecha yishvach. Lamaisa, in the way you're learning it out, it says the word yishvach in the word that in the pasuk that's telling it to you. So even though the source it says tizrek, but now we're saying you learn out Pesach from dam zvecha yishvach. So yishvach is shvicha.
Right.
Okay. So, but in any case, but the question is that we're using this pasuk of dam zvecha yishvach for something other than that a single natana achas is keeper. So Gemara Savala Rabbi Yosef Glili. The Tanya, there's a machlekes. Rabbi Yosef Glili Omer Dama le'nema Ela Dama Chalba le'nema Ela Chalba. In that original pasuk, Ach b'char shor b'char kesav b'char eis. The end of the pasuk is Lo sifta koydeshem es domam tizrik al hamizbech. Their bloods lashon rabim should go on the mizbech. Ves chalvam, the chalavim again lashon rabim should go on the mizbech. Limit al b'charu ma'aser pesach shatan matan domim ve'emurim legabim mizbech. He says it's not from dam zvachecha yishva. It's from the end of that pasuk of b'char kesav vayez. It says a lashon rabim, so it means not just bechar, but also when it says lashon rabim of damam, it means not just the dam of the bechar, but also the dam of the meiser and pesach. And the same thing with the chalev, the emurim. It also says chalvan, lashon rabim of all the different karbanis. Their meiser and pesach also have a requirement that the emurim should go on the mizbech. The brisa continues. Rabbi Shmuel, haikra mapaklei lahachi umapaklei. I'm sorry, that's the kasha. So, yeah. So this was a machlekes Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Yosef Glili. So we said that's Rabbi Shmuel used it for dam zvachecha yishva. Rabbi Yosef Glili learns it out from the multiple lishonos, right? It says lechetani Rabbi Shmuel mitach shenema ach b'char shar or b'char eis. What do you know from? He said dam zvachecha yishva. Okay, so that frankly Gemara, but now we have a problem. The person who was left on the outs in the previous two brises, both in the one about Rabbi Shmuel learned, he was arguing on Rabbi Akiva Legabe. He said Dam Zvachecha Yishvach tells you that Shvichas Hadam will work when you're supposed to do Zrika, and then he also used of dam zvachecha yishvach for the second brisa ach b'char shar b'char kesav vayez to tell you b'char meiser. So we were starting out asking from Matana Achas keeper, and we said now we've come up with someone who used the same pasuk twice for two totally separate things. So Gemara Trei Tanoi Ali b'de Rabbi Shmuel Enochanami. There's two shittas in what Rabbi Shmuel uses the pasuk for. So, it's two separate versions of Rabbi Yishmael. But Einachanami, it can't be that he would say they use the same pasuk twice. So now we're returning back to the last thing that we said b'shem Rabbi Yishmael. We had the machlekes Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva that he said when the Torah says dam zvachecha yishvach, that tells you bechar and ma'aser. So bishlam Rabbi Yishmael the mukam lakuli bebechar. When Torah says damam and chelvam, it's not referencing bechar and ma'aser. So we learn that from dam zvachecha yishvach, from a totally separate pasuk. So this pasuk contains no reference to bechar and Pesach, and I'm sorry, it doesn't reference Pesach and Meiser at all. That we can understand that it says that the basar will go to you because taka the bechar of the Meiser, the basar of a bechar goes to the owners. The owners, if you give the bechar to a kain, and the kain eats the basar, the Meiser has to be eaten in Yerushalayim. But the basar goes to the owners, like every shlomim. The basar is eaten by the owners. But according to Rabbi Yossi, he says damam and chelvam is adding in two additional karbanos of meiser and pesach. It says meiser pesach. I'm sorry. I said it incorrectly. Which is a reference to the kain. I'm sorry, not the owner. Bechar is given to the kain. and the kain is the one who eats the basar. So it says b'sar mi'elecha. The end of the pasuk, b'sar mi'elecha k'chazei atnu v'k'chayik shugim yaman l'chayim, which is the portions of the every carbon that goes to a kain. So we're saying the basar of bechar, the whole bechar goes to a kain. So that makes sense. It's only talking about a bechar, and everything goes to the kain. He says dam and chalm is incorporating meiser and pesach as well. Meiser pesach b'aylam machilei. So how could you say yelecha that it goes to the kain? My psarim yelecha. What is it teaching you? So he says no. According to Rabbi Yossi, it's telling you a different thing. It's not saying that it belongs to the kain. It's saying echad tam v'echad balmum. That it's not just a tam, but even a balmum. It doesn't normally a balmum has to be redeemed and brought as a new carbon. But in this case, whether it's and normally something that's a balmum, the din of whatever kedusha it has can no longer apply. We're saying nevertheless it will still belong to the kain, even though it begot a mum. It still has a din of bechar that it's given by the owner to a kain. Yelecha doesn't mean yelecha that the basar per se goes to the kain, because then how could you say that by bechar and meiser? It's a din specifically about bechar. The pasuk is about bechar ultimately, even though it says chalvan, but it's not saying that all the basar goes to you. It's talking about the din of bechar, that even if it's about mum, it still goes to the kain. Which we don't have any other source for this din that the bechar balmum goes to the kain. Where does Rabbi Shmuel learn this din? If we don't have any other source, where's Rabbi Shmuel who says that the pasuk, right? That where's he going to learn this din of balmum? He says yelachab is on the basar itself. So where is it telling you that it goes to the kain? He says melachayia this sefer. This Torah says l'chayia twice. The second l'chayia tells you the din that a balmum goes to the kain. So Gemara, Bishlam Rabbi Yossi Aglili, the Mukla Nami b'Maisru Pesach. According to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, that he says that, like we said before, that this pasuk, the Chelvan and the Damam, is referencing two separate karbanos. The karbanos of Mais and Pesach. Hainu of Siv Leisifta Ki Kaidish Haim. That's what it says in the pasuk. In addition, in this pasuk of Bechar, it says you shouldn't be paided because it's Kaidish. Haim Kraven Vein Tumas and Kraven. It tells you that only the tam is karev. Only the original is carbon is karev. But if someone's to make a tmura or some other replacement, that can no longer be treated. Will not have the din of the kedusha to be brought as a carbon. The tanan. So there's a lot of they changed. There's a lot of girsayos to change this. The Tanan Heinu Vladan. I'm sorry. The Tanan. Where do we have the lashon? I want to make sure I get this right. Yeah, who took this out? The first one. Oh, it's Daled Nimcha. Tanan. Tmuras. Okay, whatever. Tmuras Bechar Umaiser. We learned in a Mishnah that the Tmura of Bechar Umaiser, Hein Uvladan, they're both a Tmura, as well as the Vlad of the carbon. Uvlad Vladan, or even the grandchild of the carbon. Atzai Kalam, Hareyan Kabechar Umaiser. They have the same din as the Bechar Umaiser. They have the same din that they're not Padui, right? The general din of Ayam Balmum is that, or a Tmura, is that it can't be brought, and therefore, and it's Padui, and you bring use the replacement money, the money to buy a replacement carbon. That's not the din by Bechar and Meiser, but rather you use the money, you use the Balmum, and you eat it itself. Utna number of Yeshua Shemati Shetmuras Pesach, the same din by your Pesach. Kreva, Utmuras Pesach ain't a kreva, but the Tmuras Pesach is not brought. Again, the same din that when it's replaced, rather than being brought as a carbon, it just becomes possible. Ve'eli lefarish says, I don't have a way to be mefarish, but the bottom line is that we see the Tmuras Pesach is also not brought.
But we see that
So-
sometimes it's brought, sometimes it's not.
Okay, but
But
sometimes
the point
it's
is that
not,
we're seeing that
that's
it's
enough
not,
to
that
ask
it's
the
not
kasha.
brought. Right.
So according to Rabbi Yosef, it says it's b'maisur Pesach. So we learn it out from Bechar. It says damam and chalvan to include that Maisur and Pesach both have the din of einin nifta, just like the Bechar. So the same din applies to Maisur Pesach. El Rabbi Yishmael the mukal akula b'Bechar. He says damam and chalvan is not reference to Maisur and Pesach, but rather it's also talking about Bechar. Maisur Pesach the late krevet tumras aminale. Where does he know that that the tmura is not brought as a carbon? So he says Maisur gamar ever mibechar. So he says we have psukim. Maisur we learn out from Gzeir Shava of ever. Pesach v'hedjik sivbei kesef. He says we have a direct limit for Pesach. It says sivbei kesef. Matam im kesef. What does the pasuk say? In Kesef who makraves karbane v'hikravay say lifnei Hashem. The rabbis tmuras Pesach achar Pesach shekarv shlomim. It's coming to tell you that if you have a tmuras Pesach after Pesach, that it becomes a shlomim, which is shlomim has its own din of tmura, and that then taka the tmuras Pesach will be brought as a carbon. Yochel afnei Pesach came, but I might think even before Pesach, before it turned into a shlomim, it should also have the din that it could be brought as a tmura. So who might see that a Pesach is not brought, meaning a Pesach who's a real Pesach, who's still a Pesach, who hasn't converted into a shlamim, that it can't be brought as a tmura. This din that we say that you do bring a tmura is only by a shlamim, but not by a Pesach. So we have a pasuk that tells you directly that a Pesach can't be brought, the tmura's Pesach can't be brought. So even though we're not able to learn it out like the other, like Rabbi Yosef Glili, directly from Bechar, that Meiser and Pesach are learned directly from Bechar, but we have separate psukim from we have Gzeir Shava for Meiser, and we have a pasuk that tells you directly that a Pesach is not brought. Zaktamar. Okay, so we've come sort of to the conclusion of this, but now we had like we said, we had a bunch of. We said that the pasuk of Dam Zvachecha Yishvech tells us the din that Nitin Matana Achas is keeper. And then we brought a whole bunch of different uses for that same pasuk, and each one we said that's only according to one Manda Amr who uses it for this, but we're going with the other Manda Amr. But all these Manda Amrim, all these other Tanoim who use the pasuk for different sources, the Gemara asks, what are they going to do? V'hol hanach tanoi the mafkil el hay dam zvachera yishuv lo drasha achlina hay kol anin al mizbeach chatzitza nosim matanach skip eminolu. Where are they going to learn it out? So like the Gemara Savilu Beis Hillel, they're going to hold like Beis Hillel, like we had the machlekes in the Mishnah. The Amri Av Chata Shenitna Matanachas keeper. He says even he's going to have a lima that tells you even by chatas that you give matanachas as keeper. The Alfin and Kula mechatas. They're going to learn them all out from chatas. So they're going to go from the other side. They're going to learn it out from chatas, and since chatas is one, as we're going to have a specific limit for Beis Hillel, and they're going to say the same din will apply also for the other chatayas that are that they're also matayas. I'm sorry, they are not just the other chatayas, the other karbanas that are going to be mechaper with a single nesinas dam. So the Mishnah had continued. We'll just go a little bit more. We said vachatas shtei matas. We said, according to Beis Shammai, who was the Tanakam of our Mishnah, you need a minimum of 2 matas. Amar Rav Huna, my time in the Beis Shammai, where does he get from that a chatas needs 2 as opposed to every other carbon that needs 1? He says, kronis. The pasuk says 3 times kronis. Now, it is easily confused. The pasuk, the Gemara has a vav on each one of them. But if you look on the side, you'll see all the ones that are brought. The karnis is without a vav. That's the way it's written in our Torah. In our actual Sifrei Torah, it has it without a vav. This first karnis is talking about the parkayin parnasi, I think it's the seir nasi, right? Yeah. So the Seir Nasi is it says on it that it should be put. It's a chatas, and it's brought on the karnes hamizbech. Then it says two more karnes. It says v'lokachem midama be'etzvay v'nasal karnes mizbech ha'oilo. V'lokachem midama chatas be'etzvay v'nasal karnes mizbech ha'oilo. Those two are talking about where he brought specifically a regular carbon, a regular chatas from a goat or from a sheep. So that's why the Torah repeats the whole parsha. First it says it by Seir Nasi, then it says it with where it's brought. A regular person brings a chatas from a goat or from a sheep. So it says 3 times karnos. Karnos is a lashon rabim, multiple, with a vav. Harekan shesh. So it says 3 times, and each one is lashon rabim, so that's 6. So we darshan, according to Beis Shammai, arba mitzvah. The first 4 to tell you that you have to put on the mizbeach 4 nesinas, and that's the ideal. That's what you mitzvah. That's what you're supposed to do. Ushtayim la'akav, and the general rule always is that you need a shana of la'akav and kachim. Anything that's only said once is le mitzvah, and then so it has to say 2 more times to tell you that 2 nesinas are ma'akav. Beis Hillel disagrees. Karnos, Harekan arba. Beis Hillel says that we go after the way it's written, not the way it's read. Right? Beis Shammai said karnos with a vav, because that's the way it's written. Beis Hillel says we go after the way it's written. The way it's written. The way it's written, according to Beis Hillel, even though it's not what we have in our Sefer Torah, but the way the Gemara had it was it's written with the first 2 karnas, which is a lashon yachid, and the last one is karnos, a lashon rabin. And the Rishonim say that don't be disturbed by this, even though our Sefer Torah are different than the way Beis Hillel says it's written. We should still stick to our Messiah of what it says to write in the Sefer Torah. So this will, Bez Hashem, we'll get into Menachos. We'll get to do Stam. We'll get a little break in a few months to get off of Kachim. We'll see more about this. So in any case, he says Harekan arba. So he says Shalosh lo mitzvah. He says 3 are lo mitzvah. V'achas lakav. So it's like tomorrow. Ve'ema kula mitzvah. Why doesn't he say like Beis Hillel that the 4 is lo mitzvah and then 0 of them are lakav and none of the nesinas should be makav? He says there's no such thing. It's impossible to say that all 4 of them are lo mitzvah because you have to have zrika. It's impossible to say that you have to have all 4 avodas hadam, and you can't get rid of zrika that it's not ma. V'ibay sema, another explanation. Hide time Beis ahani mikra v'ahani mesaira. He says that no, there's also, he agrees that the way it's read is with the plural lashon. So he doesn't hold that you only look at the mesaira of how the Torah has it in writing, but we also look at the way it's read. Ahani mikra l'tfu yichad. So since it's read with the lashon rabim, so even though we only counted 4 by counting the way it's written, we add on an extra one. Ahani mesaira l'tfu yichad. So even though by looking at the mikra that would add up to 6. But we add 1 from the mikra and we take 1 off from the mesaira, so that ends up with 5. So since we end up with 5, instead of saying that we do 3 lemitzvah and 1 la'akav, we do 4 lemitzvah, because if you end up with 5, then you could say 4 lemitzvah. You can't have 4 lemitzvah if those are the only 4. But once we have 5, then you could say 4 lemitzvah, and the 5th one is la'akav. If you're going to say this, if you're going to say that whenever you have Mesaira and Mikra, according to Beis Hillel, you split the difference and you say the Mikra was 4 and the other way around. The Mesaira was 4. The Mesaira was 2 with Lashon Yachid, and the Mesaira, I keep on getting it right. Okay. The Mesaira was 4. The way the Torah has it written is 4, and the way it's red is 6, so we split the difference, so we say 5. If that's the case, only after l'tei tofos, which has the same sort of setup, which it's written 2 times with the lashon yachid and 1 time with the lashon rabim. Harei kan harba, that's 4, and therefore that's why we have 4 parshias, 4 compartments in our tefillin. Why don't we say Hani Krava Hani Mesorah Chamesha, which and therefore the Chamisha Bati Boy Lamev. You should require 5. You should split the difference, just like we said by Kronis that it comes out to 5. Let's say, which is Letaytafis, also split the difference that come out at 5. So he says no. We take apart the word Taytafis and make it into 2 words. It's really a conjunction of 2 words. The first part is tat, which is 2 in Kaspi, and pas in African language is also 2, so it tells you 4. Gemara asks, why don't we also say the Torah says 3 times sukkos, twice lashon yachid and 1 time lashon rabim? Let's say the mikra and v'hani mesorah and come out chamisha. So chamisha devansa boilam, you should have to do 5 defanas. So Gemara, hasam chad kra kula legufa. Over there, let's see. If you look at Rashi cleans up the language. Hasam dal chad legufe. We said you have to take off 1 of the psukim of sukkos, even though it really would come out 5. But we have to take it. I'm sorry, we have to take out one of the words, and because you have to tell you that you have to build the sukkah in the first place. And 1 has to tell you also that you have to put on schach. So from 5 you left out with 3, and then also hilchos of garasa l'shlishis ukimta tefach. And then the 3rd wall, as we know, you need 2 walls and a tefach. That tells you we have a halacha l'mishpsina that the 3rd wall is only a tefach. Finally, elameata b'tama shu'ayim, and it says the pasuk says that a woman after she gives birth says she should be tamei for 2 weeks shu'ayim, and it also but the way it's written is shivim, which is 70. You should split the difference between 2 weeks and 70 days, which comes out to 42. That she should be tamei. So Gemara Shani Hasan Dechsev Kinidasa. Since it says Kinidasa, Nida is for that's a Nida is she becomes 1 week. So when we're talking about, when we say Shvuayim, we're referring to weeks as opposed to Shivim, which is 70. So we have a pasuk to tell you not to darshan the 70. Okay, so we'll stop over here. Bez Shem, we're going to try to learn tonight at 8:30. Hopefully we'll chaza this Gemara, and we'll continue tomorrow.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Take care. Have a good day. Looking in the wrong place to end this thing.